Some adventures aren't meant to be taken lightly. What began as a simple, thrill-seeking trip to Isla de las Munecas, the island of the dolls, turned into a chilling nightmare for me and my friends. A cursed necklace, a swollen belly turning dark, and an unseen force that wouldn't let us go. This is the true story of how we were marked by something beyond our understanding, and not all of us made it back. I never considered myself superstitious. Growing up, I always sought logic, science, and reason, especially when it came to anything paranormal. So when my two closest friends, Marco and Danielle, suggested we visit Isla de las Munecas during our backpacking trip across Mexico, I brushed off the eerie legends surrounding the place as nothing more than ghost stories for tourists. We had heard all the tales. A reclusive man who once lived on the island claimed to be haunted by the spirit of a drowned girl. To appease her, he began collecting dolls, hundreds of them, and hung them all around the island. Some were missing eyes, others were decaying from decades of exposure to the elements. They stared blankly from trees, roofs, and broken windows, watching in silence. It sounded creepy, sure, but in the way a Halloween haunted house sounds creepy, the kind of thrill that fades as soon as the lights come on. Or so I thought. We left from Mexico City early in the morning. It was a long journey, requiring a mix of buses, and finally a ride on a trajinera, a colourful wooden boat that would take us through the canals of Xochimilco to reach the island. The locals didn't speak much when we told them our destination. One older boatman even made the sign of the cross and muttered something under his breath. That should have been a sign. The boat ride was quiet at first. We drifted through the murky waters, the thick green foliage casting shadows that danced on the canal's surface. I remember Marco cracking jokes to lighten the mood, while Daniel filmed the scenery on his phone. I was quiet, more curious than afraid, I guess. As we got closer, the atmosphere started to shift. The air felt denser, heavier. It wasn't just in my head. Even Marco stopped joking. The only sounds were the gentle creaks of the boat and the distant caws of birds that didn't sound quite right. Then, it appeared. The island of the dolls. Hundreds of dolls, maybe thousands, hung lifelessly from trees, fences, and makeshift shrines. Their eyes, those that still had them, seemed to follow us as we stepped off the boat. Some were scorched from the sun. Others had their faces eaten away by time. Dolls were everywhere. Some looked ancient. Some looked freshly placed. "Welcome to nightmare fuel," Marco muttered under his breath. I gave a dry laugh, more out of nerves than amusement. We explored slowly, moving between the trees and huts. The silence was eerie. There was no breeze, yet several of the dolls swayed gently as if stirred by an invisible presence. Daniel wandered ahead, snapping photos. Marco lingered behind, poking fun at one particularly ugly doll missing its lower jaw. I remember feeling watched, not just by the dolls, but by something more, something older. The air smelled faintly of mildew and rot. There was a tension in the air like before a storm, but the sky was clear. In the center of the island, we found what seemed to be the heart of it, a shack with hundreds of dolls nailed to the walls, hanging from strings, resting on old furniture. Inside, everything was covered in dust, spider webs clinging to every corner. Marco joked that it looked like a scene from a horror film, and this time, no one laughed. That's when Daniel called out to us. "Guys, look at this." We followed his voice to the far end of the island, where he stood beneath a tree that held only one doll. It was unlike the others. It was smaller, porcelain, with a nearly perfect face. Around its neck hung a small silver necklace with a black stone pendant. It shimmered strangely in the light. "That's weirdly intact," Marco said, stepping closer. "I think it's real silver," Daniel whispered, already reaching for it. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Let's not mess with anything here." But Daniel had already taken it. The second he lifted the necklace, the stillness shattered. A gust of wind slammed through the trees, whipping branches and dolls alike. A loud crack echoed from the woods behind us, like something had broken or fallen. Then silence again, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. We all stood frozen. "Probably just wind," Daniel said, though his voice was trembling. I wanted to believe him. Truly I did, but in my gut I knew we'd just done something very wrong. Still, none of us said it out loud. We pretended everything was fine, even as we rushed to get off the island, barely filming anything else. The ride back on the Trajinera was tense and quiet. Even Marco didn't speak. That night, back at our hostel in the city, none of us could sleep. There was a strange energy in the air, like the weight of something we couldn't see had followed us. Something had changed. We just didn't know how much yet. Back in Mexico City, things didn't feel the same. At first it was small stuff. The lights in our hostel room flickered every so often, even though no one else in the building seemed to have the same issue. Our phones would randomly shut down or restart, and Marco's camera, where we'd stored most of our footage, was completely wiped. He swore he didn't delete anything. Still, we chalked it up to technical issues and maybe nerves. We didn't want to admit something was wrong. The necklace Daniel had taken from the doll still hung around his neck. He wore it constantly, even joking that it might be his lucky charm. Maybe it's cursed, he laughed once, winking. But even he didn't laugh for long. Deep down, none of us found it funny anymore. On our third night after the visit, things took a turn. We were all in the hostel room, a small space with 2 beds and a mattress pulled onto the floor. Marco and I were on our phones while Daniel was in the bathroom. He'd been in there for quite a while when we heard a loud thud. I jumped up immediately. "Daniel?" No answer. Marco rushed ahead and banged on the door. "Bro, you okay?" Another pause. Then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened slowly, revealing Daniel hunched over the sink, his shirt clinging to his back from sweat. His skin was pale, lips slightly blue. "What the hell happened?" I asked, moving toward him. He looked up at us, and I'll never forget his eyes, wide, unfocused, like he wasn't entirely there. He didn't speak at first. He just shook his head slowly, like trying to come back from something far away. Then he finally muttered, "My stomach, it hurts." We helped him sit down, and I lifted his shirt to check. His stomach looked strange. Not bruised exactly, but like there was something just beneath the skin, like veins that had darkened and spread outward in branching patterns. Marco tried to play it off. "Could be food poisoning, right? Bad tacos or something." But we all knew it wasn't that. Danielle hadn't eaten more than a few bites all day. He'd been complaining about a constant pressure in his gut, like something was moving inside. That night, no one slept. Daniel kept tossing and turning, groaning softly in his sleep. Sometimes he'd sit straight up and just stare at nothing. His eyes would dart around the room like he was seeing something we couldn't. At around 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of whispering. I thought maybe it was Marco talking in his sleep, but when I looked over, I saw Daniel sitting on the floor, right next to the door. He was whispering to himself in a voice I didn't recognize. The words weren't in English. They weren't even Spanish. I called his name softly. "Daniel?" He turned to me slowly. His eyes were completely bloodshot and he smiled, just for a second, before standing up and walking back to bed as if nothing happened. I didn't say anything. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping the sun would come soon. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He seemed tired, sure, but otherwise normal. Almost too normal. That day, Marco and I agreed to take him to a clinic just to be safe, but Daniel resisted. "I'm fine," he said, waving us off. "It's just a bug." But he wasn't fine. That afternoon, while sitting at a cafe, he suddenly doubled over in pain. He let out a choked cry and clutched his stomach. We helped him into a cab and took him to the nearest clinic. The doctor spoke English well enough, and after a short check, he looked concerned. He said Daniel's abdomen was showing signs of inflammation, but there was no clear medical explanation for the internal pressure or the discoloration starting to spread across his skin. "We'll need to run tests," he said. "You should admit him overnight." But Daniel refused. He was becoming increasingly irritable, almost paranoid. He said he didn't want to be alone, that something was waiting if he let his guard down. When we got back to the hostel, we tried to calm him down, but it was clear now something was inside him. Not physically, perhaps, but spiritually, like the island had left a mark on him. That night, as Marco and I sat on the balcony smoking quietly, he said something that chilled me to my bones. "I think it's the necklace." I turned to him. "What?" "I saw it," Marco said, looking pale. "When I went through the photos earlier, the ones I thought were deleted. They weren't all gone. There was just one photo left." He opened his phone and showed me. It was a picture of Daniel holding the necklace right after he'd pulled it off the doll. But behind him, almost hidden in the shadows, was the faint outline of a figure. A child maybe, or something smaller. Pale, featureless. It had no eyes, but I could feel it staring. We both sat in silence. Neither of us had the courage to show Daniel. The signs were undeniable now. The strange dreams, the voices, the cold spots in the room, the shadow under Daniel's bed that seemed to move even when the lights were on. The real horror hadn't started on the island. It had followed us home. We were in too deep. After that night, the hostel no longer felt safe. The walls seemed thinner, the shadows longer, and silence no longer meant peace. It meant waiting, as if something just beyond the edges of hearing was creeping closer with every hour. Daniel's condition worsened fast. His stomach had swollen visibly, bloated, discoloured, like something unnatural was growing inside. What terrified us wasn't just the physical transformation, but what it was doing to him. His mood swung wildly, one moment eerily calm, the next violent and agitated. He began talking to someone none of us could see. "She's coming," he whispered once, staring at the window. "She wants it back." We asked what he meant, but he just laughed. A low, strained chuckle that didn't sound like Daniel at all. Marco and I were exhausted, running on fear and caffeine. We tried calling Daniel's family, but his phone wouldn't connect. Emails bounced. Even when we tried showing someone at the hostel the state he was in, things changed. When the staff checked in on him, his symptoms seemed to vanish. The swelling appeared reduced. The bruising faded. They thought we were overreacting, or worse, hallucinating. That night, Marco suggested something we hadn't dared yet. "We need to take the necklace back to the island." I froze. "You think that's it?" "You saw the picture," he said. "You know I'm right. Whatever this is, it didn't start here. It started there. Maybe if we return it, whatever this thing is will let go of him." The plan felt desperate, but we were out of options. Daniel was barely eating, barely sleeping. He flinched at his own reflection. Sometimes he muttered in that same strange language under his breath. And once I swear I heard a child's voice respond. Soft, like wind through broken glass. Marco booked a return to Xochimilco for the next morning. We told Daniel what we were doing, but he refused to come. "You're making it angry," he said, clutching his stomach. "It won't let me leave." That's when we realized something horrifying. Daniel couldn't take off the necklace. We tried. Gently at first, then more forcefully. But the moment our fingers touched the chain, he screamed in agony. His skin sizzled as if it burned him. The necklace wouldn't budge. It was like it had grown into him. "I told you," he gasped between breaths. "It's too late. I took what wasn't mine." Still, we left for the island the next morning. Marco and I sat in the boat, the water calm and sickly green. The old man steering didn't say much until halfway there. Then, without turning to face us, he said in Spanish, "Someone took from the wrong doll." Marco translated it for me, his face pale. He says, "Not all dolls are the same. Some are guardians, some are prisoners." He says if we took something from the wrong one, it won't be returned easily. We asked what to do, but the old man just shook his head. "No hay perdón, si no hay sangre." No forgiveness without blood. I didn't know what that meant yet, but it sat heavy in my chest. When we arrived, the island was even more unsettling in daylight. The dolls seemed different now, their eyes sharper, their limbs twitching slightly in the breeze, as if reacting to our presence. We found the spot. The doll Daniel had taken the necklace from was still there, its head cocked slightly, mouth open in a silent scream. Marco knelt in front of it, holding a small offering we had brought, a rosary, a child's toy and some food wrapped in cloth. He whispered a prayer, then buried the items beneath the doll. The wind stopped, dead still, and then we heard it. Laughter. High, childlike, but wrong. Twisted. It echoed through the trees. All the dolls began to sway, even the ones untouched by wind. Marco clutched my arm. "We have to go." We ran back to the boat. The old man had already started the motor like he knew. As we pulled away, I looked back, and for just a second I saw her. A girl. Small, pale, with long black hair matted around her face. She stood among the dolls, her hand reaching toward the empty space on the doll where the necklace had once hung. Her eyes, black and endless, locked onto mine. I looked away. When we got back to the hostel, Daniel was worse than ever. He was lying on the floor, gasping for air. His stomach had swollen more, stretching his skin almost to tearing. He looked at us with tears in his eyes and whispered, "She followed you back." That night, the whispers returned, clearer now. They filled the room, not just one voice, but many. Children, crying, giggling, screaming. Marco and I sat huddled near the wall, unsure if we were losing our minds. Then Daniel screamed. It was unlike anything I've ever heard. Raw, primal. We turned to him, and there, beneath the necklace, his skin split slightly, just enough for something to move beneath it. We didn't sleep. We didn't dare. That night is burned into my memory. Daniel was lying in bed, moaning, drenched in sweat. His skin looked almost translucent, stretched tight over his bloated stomach, which now resembled something grotesquely unnatural. Blue and black veins bulged across his abdomen, and his eyes were wide open, unmoving, locked onto the ceiling. Marco stood frozen at the edge of the bed. I was near the door, unsure whether to call for help or run, but something told me no doctor could fix what was happening here. Daniel suddenly let out a shuddering breath, then another, but the third wasn't a breath, it was a whisper, not in his voice. "She warned you." The words came from his mouth, but it wasn't Daniel speaking. The voice was higher, feminine, childlike, but tinged with rage and grief. It echoed unnaturally, like it came from a cave rather than a room. Then his body jolted, arching up as if something inside was trying to escape. Marco ran to his side. "Brian, help me hold him." But I couldn't move. Daniel's mouth opened wide, unnaturally wide, and he screamed. Blood bubbled from his lips. His stomach began to move. Something was shifting beneath his skin, like a creature writhing to be born. "Get it off," he cried, his voice barely his own. "The necklace, please." Marco tried again. He grabbed the chain and pulled. Daniel shrieked. The lights flickered. The walls trembled as if the entire building had been dropped into an earthquake. A blast of cold wind swept through the room, knocking books off the shelf and sending the curtains flying. Then, a snap. The necklace broke, but instead of relief, everything exploded. The window shattered. A blast of pressure surged through the room, and the temperature plummeted. I swear I saw her, the little girl standing in the corner, soaked, silent, her eyes completely black. She raised a hand and pointed at Daniel. "You took what bound her," the voice echoed. "Now she is free, and so is it." Daniel screamed again, louder, rawer than before, and then it happened. His stomach split open, not like a medical rupture. This was unnatural. A thick, dark liquid poured out, but it wasn't just blood. It was black, oily, reeking of rot and something older than death. Inside the torn flesh there was movement. Something crawled, slowly, out of him. I'll never forget it. Small like a doll. Its limbs crooked and stiff. Its head misshapen. It dragged itself halfway out of Daniel's torn abdomen before collapsing into a pool of blackness. Its glassy eyes looked right at me. Daniel slumped backward. His breath faded. Then silence, but not peace. The room felt full, thick with presence. Dolls, yes, actual dolls we had never brought, now lined the windowsill. Their heads slowly turned to face inward, their eyes fixed on Daniel. Marco whispered in horror. What did we bring back with us? We tried to move him. He was still alive somehow, breathing barely. His pulse was faint, but he didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared upward as if watching something we couldn't see. We called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived but said little. They took him with pale faces, avoiding our eyes. I overheard one of them muttering in Spanish, "Maldito por los espíritus," cursed by the spirits. Marco and I sat in the hallway afterward, silent, shocked. Number all we had left was the broken necklace, its chain burned at the ends, the pendant now cracked down the middle. We threw it into the canal that night, but I don't think that ended it. Daniel survived that night barely, but something in him had changed. He didn't speak, wouldn't eat. He just stared, always toward a corner like she was still there. And in our dreams, she visited both Marco and me, standing at the foot of our beds, saying nothing, just watching. We left Mexico the very next day. The flight home was quiet. Daniel, still unconscious, was transported on a medical flight 2 days later. Marco and I sat next to each other on the plane, but neither of us spoke. Our thoughts kept replaying the nightmare over and over again. I kept seeing that thing, crawling from Daniel's stomach, That necklace, those black watching eyes. Back home, Daniel was admitted to a hospital in critical condition. His stomach had become severely infected, and the doctors couldn't explain the source of the strange fluid in his body. Something toxic, they said, but there's no clear cause. They ran every test they could, CT scans, biopsies, blood cultures, but the results made no sense. Marco and I visited him every day, but Daniel never opened his eyes, he never moved. He just laid there, alive, but barely tethered to the world. Every time I saw him, I felt a cold wave of guilt and fear wash over me. 3 days after we returned, I woke up from a dream. She was there again, the little girl in the waterlogged dress, her hair matted across her face, standing at the foot of my bed. This time she whispered, "He should not have touched it." Then she turned and disappeared into darkness. That afternoon, I got a call. Daniel had passed away. His heart had stopped without warning. The hospital recorded the cause of death as multiple organ failure, but couldn't find a medical reason. His body had simply given up. At the funeral, Marco stood beside me. His hands were trembling. We didn't talk much. What could we say? The guilt never left us. We had ignored the signs, laughed at the warnings, dismissed the legends as tourist folklore. But now, one of us was gone. And not just gone, taken, consumed by something that should have remained undisturbed. We later learned from a local guide that the necklace Danielle took was known among the caretakers of Isla de las Munecas. It was said to belong to the spirit of a drowned girl, a gift placed by her grieving parents. No one had dared touch it for decades. Until us. I've never returned to Mexico since. Marco moved away, across the country. We still message once in a while, but we never talk about that night. I kept a journal of everything that happened, and now I'm sharing it. Not for attention, not for fame, but as a warning. Some places are not meant for exploration. Some things are meant to be left alone. Not every legend is just a story, and not every spirit forgives. Daniel didn't deserve what happened to him, but curiosity and arrogance cost him his life. And the rest of us, we were left with scars no one else can see, and memories that will haunt us until our last breath.